This is the Palin Update on Mama Grizzly Radio. I'm Kevin Scholla in the 3D Security and Training Academy studios.
Reporters especially not just taking one extra step to get to the facts and report the facts, but instead continue to spread things that are not true.
Make no mistake about it, much of the press in America today is in the back pocket of the Obama administration. Stories are slanted, context is flipped, flat-out lies are told. That's why it's so refreshing when an accomplished journalist is not afraid to speak the truth and deal in facts all the time. Award-winning author, correspondent, anchor, and reporter Sharyl Attikisson is here to talk about the media and much more. Sarah Palin stands with Bibi. The governor explains why the Hillary email scandal matters. Arkansas delivers for Convention of States. A brand new installment of Liberty and Legacy with Tamara Colbert is on the way from Texas. And just ahead, our latest edition of Steel Resolve with Sarah Steelman in Missouri. Welcome to the Palin Update on Mama Grizzly Radio. The Palin Update is sponsored by 3D Security and Training Academy. Learn more at 3dsta.com. Right now, we say hello to Sharyl Attikisson. As talented a journalist there is, she's done it all over the years, on scene, behind the desk, and, of course, her superb investigative skills. Let's bring her in right now to the Palin Update on Mama Grizzly Radio. Sharyl Attikisson, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on Stonewalled, your best-selling book, really flying off the shelves. People talking about it. People have come up to me and have mentioned it, and really good stuff. I think things that some people have thought of before, but now they see someone who's talking about it and putting it in print. Can you give us a little background on what the book's about for those who may have not gotten their hands on it yet?
Sure, and I'm glad to learn that it had fairly widespread appeal among a great cross-section of the American public. It wasn't just a niche book, which I kind of wondered if people would view it that way. But I'm discussing sort of the challenges in today's journalism, the open government challenges, the pressures that come to bear on investigative journalists or most any kind of journalist trying to do original reporting these days, the tactics and strategies used by corporate, special interest, political interest to try to stop that sort of reporting, to controversialize the reporters and outlets that do challenging sorts of things. And I guess I'm just sort of, peeling back a little of the mystery for people who know something's wrong when they watch the news. Maybe they can't quite put their finger on it. And I try to give just the viewpoint kind of from the inside.
And so wrong that someone with your career and talent and background, you got out of network broadcasting last year. Why'd you make that huge decision?
It was time to go. I felt like the forces that were, in my view, influencing the news in such a way that some of the best stories would not and could not be told were fairly insurmountable at CBS News, and I know some of my colleagues share the same viewpoint working in print and at other networks and even local news. It's sort of a phenomenon, but there didn't seem to be much point to me for my producer and I to continue turning up what we thought were great original stories and having whistleblowers and insiders kind of put their careers and lives on the line in some respects, or their way of life on the line, only to find out that nobody wanted to hear their story told anymore. And that was kind of the atmosphere the last couple of years at CBS.
I think one of the interesting themes in the book is that you talk about your overall feel as far as it's not just political ideology or the Obama administration that a lot of news outlets try to cater to, but there's other bias that you run into as well?
Sure. I mean, there's so many complex factors that I think have all come together in one time to make it across the board very difficult to do great reporting. Not that it's not still getting done to some degree at many outlets. It's just harder. It's more difficult to get the stories on. There are greater attempts to either censor or skew the reporting at the managerial level or the editorial level in some cases. But I think that it's just became super difficult, and I think that this process and these experiences were shared by many, and we discussed this at investigative reporting conferences with colleagues who face similar challenges.
Fast and Furious and Benghazi are a couple of stories that you really got out there when others didn't. And I think a lot of Americans from all stripes really appreciate the work you did there. And, a lot of people, especially when it comes to Benghazi, it just seemed like it faded away from the papers and people were talking about things a lot less important, for lack of a better phrase. Where do things stand as far as Benghazi right now, and how do you think it'll affect Hillary Clinton?
Well, maybe you can ask that again if I forget the question you've asked, but because I want to preface it by saying it's not that the public, I think, quit caring about Benghazi. It's a very important story, but I think it was successfully taken from the front pages by these strategies and tactics that I describe that try to make news reporters believe, and therefore the public believe, that certain topics are either off limits or controversial or old news or whatever they want the propaganda to say. And instead of the media being strong and independent, in many cases we kind of buy into it, the propaganda or the pushback efforts, and we're convinced to sort of shelf a story that nonetheless, if you ask many members of the public, they would be keenly interested in. We're somehow convinced to move along. I don't know how this will affect Hillary Clinton, quite frankly. As I always say, her supporters are not going to be moved by hardly anything that comes out about Hillary Clinton because they support her for their own reasons. Her detractors aren't going to vote for her anyway, so is that going to make a big difference? With all the recent controversies arising about Hillary Clinton, most recently, of course, her email controversy, it makes me wonder, is there a movement out there among liberals that would rather have a different candidate? I don't think it's by chance or by accident that even liberal publications are criticizing her and going after her. And I hate to say that I always think there's some ulterior motive, but there often is a motive on the part of agenda reporters that do report certain things for a reason. And it does make me wonder, with all the criticism of Hillary Clinton, what it is they really want out of this. Perhaps they want another candidate. I don't know.
Well, speaking of trying to sweep things under the rug, that whole email scandal with Hillary Clinton, can you tell listeners why this is a big deal, even though it may not be getting the coverage that some would think would happen here?
I think it's a big deal, but no bigger than Benghazi, the things we still don't know about Benghazi, but a symptom of a culture and a way of operating that can be found in many corners of government these days that feels as though it can operate outside the rules, that lends itself to the idea that, at least the appearance that they were trying to, Mrs. Clinton and her supporters, control all the information that would be released. I mean, we've been asking for Benghazi emails. I've had a Freedom of Information request in since, of course, 2012, and apparently she hasn't searched her emails until now to try to fulfill my Freedom of Information request. These are public documents, public in nature, many, if not most of them, that we're entitled to see, and she left the State Department without even leaving a record of those behind. And the idea that now she's producing them and that somehow complies with the spirit of the law, to me as a journalist, is ridiculous. Those documents should be available in real time, especially the ones that are deemed to be public in nature. We shouldn't have to, A, not know that they haven't been turned over, and B, have to wait for them years and years when these were relevant in 2012 when we asked for them. So I think it just sort of demonstrates the appearance of sort of secrecy and control, which again can be found in many corners of the federal government.
Now, when it comes to emails on the Internet, your name has come up a lot in that area of late. You were hacked. What happened there? By whom? And where do things stand?
Well, I have a current lawsuit challenging the Department of Justice as well as an administrative claim. These are processes that have to be followed when one is suing the government, but in essence it claims illegal wiretapping on the part of the government in violation of constitutional rights to privacy and freedom of the press for the documented infiltration, despite the false reporting that some may see out there by the agenda reporters and those who copy their reporting without checking it. There's been the confirmation by 3 forensics exams of remote intrusions of both my personal Apple desktop computer and my CBS laptop work computer by highly sophisticated forces that did a whole lot of kind of misdeeds and left tracks as to what they did. And the only way I knew about this at all, I certainly didn't suspect myself it was going on, because this was pre-Edward Snowden and before we knew the government was looking at AP's records secretly, before we knew what the Justice Department was doing to Fox News reporter James Rosen. So I didn't suspect anything, but I was alerted, tipped off by people who are familiar with government practices as to what was probably happening to me because of my reporting. And I would assume to other reporters as well who do this sort of reporting on the administration. So it was a very intrusive and long-term monitoring and surveillance of, they have the ability to monitor and surveil everything I did on the computer, We know that they looked at my documents, looked at my photographs, accessed the CBS email system. I had a keystroke program in there, obtained my passwords to all accounts that I used, and a lot more.
And, here you are doing factual, important reporting, and that's got to get you obviously upset that they're coming after you for that. But from a personal standpoint, you have family stuff here. Your family's getting involved. I mean, that's got to just, really top things off.
Well, that's really off limits. I mean, it's illegal that somebody did this to me, but the idea that these computers, in some respects, my Apple desktop computer was shared by my husband and family members, yes, that's an intrusion to them as well, which is why they're named in the lawsuit. Who knows what we'll be able to find out with the process of the lawsuit, but I have a terrific lawyer who says this is one of the worst breaches he's ever seen in over 30 years of practicing law, that the government would do this. And he, by the way, is a huge Democrat supporter and a Democratic donor who thinks that whoever's in charge, he would pursue the case anyway because he thinks it is really an egregious violation of everything that our country is all about. What we're hoping to do is, at the very least, raise a lot of awareness and make it more difficult for these sorts of things to happen to other people in the future.
Well, certainly the kind of lawyer you want in that situation. That's great news. You think there's a good chance to find out the culprits here?
It's hard to say to some degree. We rely on those who we think did it in being honest and turning over information to give us the details, and you know where that's going to go. The Department of Justice, when the Inspector General looked at one of my computers, as I asked them to do, not the main computer, they sort of did a report that if you read between the lines, they were trying to steer people into believing they thought nothing had happened to the computer, despite the fact that they themselves had given strong response to me, the investigators along the way, of seeing all kinds of suspicious activities. And they were not able to dig into my personal Apple desktop nearly as far as my other forensics experts were, which is fine. But they are, in essence, sort of the accused agency looking in at themselves. And when they came out and said, well, we couldn't find evidence of remote intrusion, but nor could they rule it out, the press then took spin and improperly reported that they had ruled out all of the illegal improper intrusions in all my computers, which is simply completely false, not the least of which because they never even looked at the main computer, the CBS computer, which CBS confirmed had been compromised, and CBS wouldn't let them have that computer, probably for good reason. I mean, CBS discussed it and said, why should we let the very agency that we believe did this examine the computer, and they didn't want them to have it. In my case, the reason I wanted them to look at my Apple desktop computer was we already had our forensics, and I felt, at the very least, perhaps they would find something a little bit more than what we had. At worst, they would find nothing at all, which is kind of how it ended up, but that's fine since we have our own forensics. But I guess I was hoping for sort of an honest assessment on the part of some investigators that might really turn up more information, and in that case, it didn't.
What did you think of the whole Brian Williams situation? Sadly, I wasn't surprised at all. Were you?
No, I would say I wasn't surprised by that. I guess my commentary has been limited to saying if you do think that's bad or something that's a serious violation, then I would suspect you thought when Hillary Clinton did something very similar that you would also consider that a huge and serious violation. Or if it doesn't bother you that Hillary Clinton made up the story or mistold a story about being shot at, it probably shouldn't bother you as much that Brian Williams did it. I would argue that a public elected official or someone serving as Secretary of State is probably a more important figure to our way of life and to decision-making than is, a TV personality, but that's up for people to make up their own minds as to how important either of those cases is.